In the summer of 1518, hundreds of people began dancing in the streets of Strasbourg, and they couldn't stop. Not for food, not for water, not even for death. Their feet bled through their shoes as they moved day and night, collapsing one after another while the music played on. No one knew why it started, and no one knew how to end it. Some said it was poison, others said it was punishment from God. The city council built stages and hired musicians, thinking the dancers could sweat it out, but that only made it worse. Within weeks, the streets looked like a living nightmare. Crowds twisting, shouting, praying, and dying in rhythm to a song no one could hear. Centuries later, scientists, historians, and doctors still can't agree on what really happened. Was it mass hysteria, secret worship, or something much darker? This is one of the strangest medical mysteries in human history, the plague that made people dance themselves to death. It was July 1518, and in Strasbourg, a town in what's now eastern France, life was very difficult. Food was short, and most were just trying to survive. The year before had been called the bad year, and this one wasn't any better. To make matters worse, strange new diseases were spreading across Europe. People whispered about the French disease and the pox. Every fever or rash felt like a warning from heaven. Priests spoke of sin and punishment, and no one could escape the feeling that something worse was coming. That was the world Frau Troffea stepped into when she left her home one morning that July. Her street was quiet, with just a few neighbours sitting in the shade. She stood still for a moment, then began to move. At first, it didn't seem like much. She took a few slow steps, almost like she was distracted. Then she started moving faster, her feet hitting the stones again and again. There was no music, no reason for it, just her dancing alone in the street. People watched from their doors, unsure if she was joking or sick. Her arms began to twitch, her face twisted with strain, and her body kept jerking forward. Someone called out her name, but she didn't respond. She danced through the heat of the afternoon, her clothes soaked in sweat. As evening came, the neighbours expected her to collapse or rest. Instead, she kept moving under the fading light. Her steps slowed only when her body gave out completely. But when morning came, she was back in the street again, moving as if her feet were being pulled by something invisible. No one knew what to make of it. Some said she was cursed. Others said she was touched by divine punishment. The sound of her shoes on the stones carried through the street steady and harsh. Children peeked from behind doorways. Traders stopped their carts. And still she moved. People began to gather. They watched in silence, waiting for her to stop. She didn't. By the second day, fear was spreading as quickly as the story itself. Some neighbours claimed she didn't sleep or eat. Her face, they said, looked both exhausted and distant, as if she wasn't truly there. By the fourth day, word had reached the city council. The guards came to watch, but even they stood back, unsure what to do. Frau Troffea kept moving in that small street, and no one could explain it. Some thought she was cursed, others whispered she was sick or possessed. But as the days passed, something even stranger happened. Those who had been watching began to move too. At first, it was only a few people. One tapped a foot, another began to sway. Soon their whole bodies were moving, caught in the same strange rhythm. It was as if whatever had taken over her had spread to them too. By the end of the week, the quiet street had turned into confusion. More people joined each day, their faces pale and strained as they tried to stop their bodies from moving. Some danced until they stumbled to the ground, gasping for air, only to rise again and keep going. Others fainted where they stood, their limbs still twitching even after they lost consciousness. The heat made everything worse, and people were drenched in sweat. By late July, around 30 people were caught in the same spell. Word spread quickly, and crowds gathered from across the city. Many came just to watch, but some who stood too close found themselves pulled into it, their feet moving before they could think. No one could explain why. The city guards tried to keep people away, but soon it was hard to tell who was watching and who was caught up in it. As the days passed, the situation worsened. Priests moved through the crowds with crosses, praying for it to stop, while city officials stood by, unsure what to do. People began collapsing faster than others could help them. Some never got back up, their hearts giving out from heat and exhaustion. Meanwhile, the city leaders thought they could reason their way through the madness. The Council of Strasbourg, made up of wealthy merchants, and guildmasters called in the city's physicians. The doctors looked at the crowds filling the streets and decided that this was not a curse or punishment from heaven. According to their medical training, it was a physical illness. They said the dancers were suffering from overheated blood, which made the brain boil with energy and confusion. In their view, the cure was simple. Let them keep dancing until the excess heat is gone. Following that advice, the council made one of the strangest public health plans in history. They cleared open spaces, including 2 guild halls and the grain market, so the dancers could move freely. They even built a wooden stage near the horse fair to hold more people. Musicians were also brought in to play non-stop, with drums, fiddles and pipes going the whole time. Strongmen were hired to hold up those who began to faint, forcing their bodies to keep moving. The council hoped that by giving the dancers a safe place to dance, the sickness would burn itself out. But the plan made everything worse. The music carried through the streets and more people joined in. What was meant to be a cure turned into a public show. The crowds grew larger. The sound of feet on wood echoed through the market day and night. According to later historians, few actions could have spread the panic faster than that. People who watched began to imagine the curse taking hold of them too. Soon the city was losing control. Reports said up to 15 people were dying every day from exhaustion, heart failure, or stroke. The council had no choice but to stop the dancing and rethink everything. The doctor's explanation no longer made sense, so the leaders turned to the church. They began to whisper that this was not a sickness at all, but punishment. Priests across the city started warning that Strasbourg had fallen out of grace. They said the people had forgotten the feast of St. Vitus, a holy martyr, known both for protecting dancers and for punishing those who mocked the sacred. To the frightened townspeople, it made sense. St. Vitus was believed to have the power to make sinners dance until they begged for mercy. Some even claimed that his relics in nearby towns had begun to weep oil, a sign that he was angered and calling for repentance. The idea spread quickly. What had looked like madness was now seen as a divine message. The dancers, many believed, were not cursed by chance. They were chosen as a warning. Preachers said their pain was proof that the city's sins had grown too heavy to ignore. To them, the wild movement in the streets was a living sermon. The body turned into confession. The city council, desperate for calm, decided to act in cooperation with the church. Together, they abandoned the doctor's advice and placed their faith in ritual. The plan was simple but symbolic. The afflicted would be taken out of Strasbourg and sent on a pilgrimage to the shrine of St. Vitus in Saverne, a small mountain town a few miles away. The journey would serve as a public act of penance. Groups of dancers, trembling and weak, were loaded into wagons for the trip. Along the way, priests walked beside them, chanting prayers and sprinkling holy water as they went. People watched in silence as the procession left the city. Some believed that once the dancers reached the shrine and prayed before St. Vitus, the curse would lift and the city would be spared. At Saverne, the priests had prepared a special ceremony designed to cleanse both body and soul. The shrine contained a carved image of St. Vitus, the Virgin Mary, and Pope Marcellus. The dancers were brought before it while the priests performed mass. The air smelled of incense, and bells rang while priests said Latin prayers, asking for the saints' mercy. Each afflicted person was given a pair of red shoes for the ritual. The priests rubbed holy oil across the tops and soles, then sprinkled them with blessed water. They drew small painted crosses on the shoes and placed them on the dancers' feet. The sufferers were told to hold wooden crosses in their hands as the prayers continued. Every motion of the ritual symbolized surrender to divine power, a way of saying that only St. Vitus could restore their control. According to accounts written afterwards, something seemed to change after that. Word spread back to Strasbourg that those who took part in the pilgrimage were finally able to stop moving. People said the saint had forgiven them and that his curse had been lifted. For a city desperate for hope, that was enough. Whether the healing came from faith, exhaustion, or simple relief, no one knew. But the story gave the people of Strasbourg a reason to believe that the wrath of St. Vitus had passed and that peace, at least for now, had returned. As the weeks passed, the chaos finally began to fade. People returned to work, though the fear lingered. Doctors still argued with priests about what had happened. Some called it an illness of the blood. Others said it was divine punishment. When the physician Paracelsus showed up later, he didn't agree with either theory. He was a well-known Swiss doctor and alchemist, and he thought the dancing came from the imagination, more a problem of the mind than the body. His own cures were harsh. He suggested fasting, isolation, and even whipping, thinking the shock would break the trance. No one ever really figured out what came over people that summer. The dancing just stopped on its own, and some wondered if the pilgrimage had actually worked. By the end of summer, the city was eventually silent again, left with questions no one could answer. What started as a wild movement across the streets slowly lost its force. Day by day, fewer people could stand. The same bodies that had been moving non-stop were now weak and worn out. By early September, the strange plague had run its course, not through cure or reason, but through sheer exhaustion. The human body can only move for so long before it gives out. Letters from that time tell how funerals and processions began to blend together. The streets that once shook with dancing were now filled with hymns and slow walks. Families buried loved ones quietly, while others still moved with small tremors they could not control. Some said the survivors seemed haunted, their hands trembling for weeks as if their bodies remembered what their minds wanted to forget. The city was tired, frightened, and ready to pretend none of it had ever happened. The daily deaths that had once reached up to 15 slowly stopped appearing. The council records grew silent too, noting little more than the ordinary business of the city again. It was as if everyone agreed not to speak about what had passed. No one kept an exact count of how many died. Some said dozens, others said hundreds. The truth was likely somewhere in between, but everyone who lived through it seemed changed. Doctors and priests both stepped back from what they had claimed to know. The people no longer trusted their own bodies, afraid that the strange shaking could return. When the last dancer fell still, Strasbourg didn't celebrate. It simply went quiet. The city carried on, scarred by what had happened. No one ever found a clear reason for the dancing plague. It ended as mysteriously as it began, leaving behind only brief records, unanswered questions, and the memory of a summer when hundreds moved until their bodies could not move anymore. It's easy to blame superstition or stress, but what if the truth was hidden in something everyone relied on every day? Among the many ideas about what caused the dancing plague, one of the most unsettling reimagines it as an act of sabotage. According to this version, the people of Strasbourg were not victims of madness or divine punishment, but of poisoned food. The theory points to ergot, a fungus that grows on rye and releases chemicals that can make people hallucinate, convulse, or lose control of their bodies. Some researchers say that if enough people ate bread made from infected grain, it could explain the strange behaviour that took over the city. But in this version, the contamination was not an accident. It was a plan. Ergot, known to medieval people as the black grain, was feared long before science gave it a name. Villagers believed it carried curses. When it infected rye, it created small, dark growths that blended in with the seeds. People who ate it often felt burning in their limbs, saw visions, or moved in wild, jerky motions. To many, it felt like witchcraft. According to old merchant records, rumours began spreading through Strasbourg that someone had tampered with the city's food supply. Some shipments of grain were said to have been diverted or mixed with witches' powder. The story went that rival traders or jealous guilds had introduced the poison to weaken the city or punish the poor. At the time, famine and tension had already made people suspicious of one another. Bread was more than food, it was survival. So when hundreds began twitching and convulsing in the streets, it was easy to imagine that someone had done it on purpose. Ergot's symptoms looked nothing like an ordinary sickness. Victims experienced burning sensations in their hands and feet, painful spasms and strange fits that could last for hours. Some screamed at unseen shapes or said they felt their skin crawling. To observers, it looked as if their bodies were being controlled by something unnatural. According to a study from Vilnius University, researcher Vitus Lapinskas noted that ergot poisoning, or ergotism, appeared in two main forms. The first, called St. Anthony's fire, caused severe pain, blackened limbs, and a burning sensation so intense that many believed it was a punishment from God. The second, known as St. Vitus's dance, affected the nervous system, bringing on seizures, spasms, and vivid hallucinations. People who suffered from it often lost control of their movements, twisting and jerking in ways that looked disturbingly similar to to what witnesses described in Strasbourg. Writers in later centuries compared the event to other moments in history when illness was blamed on secret plots. During the Spanish flu outbreak in 1918, for example, a US officer claimed that German spies had spread germs in theatres to weaken the population. Given the fear and confusion at the time, it didn't sound far-fetched. People truly believed something deliberate was happening. In the 16th century, this fear took root in the story of the dancers. If bread could carry death, then anyone could be the enemy. Some historians see this theory as an early idea of biological warfare, long before the term existed. Contaminating food meant targeting the poor, the ones most likely to eat low-quality rye. It would have been a silent attack, one that left no clear evidence behind. Those who believed it imagined that merchants had used the famine to turn desperation into destruction. That's one explanation. But another idea takes things in a completely different direction. One that doesn't blame the bread or any disease, but the people themselves. Some people believed the dancing plague wasn't a sickness or a curse at all, but something far more secretive. According to this theory, the dancers were part of a hidden guild that practiced rhythmic trances beneath Strasbourg's busy guild halls. These underground spaces were not only meeting points for trade, but also places where small groups gathered for private rituals. They were tight-knit circles that followed their own customs, guarded their secrets, and sometimes mixed religion with old folk traditions. This idea comes from a few scattered records that mention a sect of dancers moving together in an odd, almost synchronized way, as if they were following the same rhythm. Some describe a kind of ritualized movement used to reach a state of spiritual ecstasy. Instead of random madness, the dancing was seen as a planned act of worship. Members of the sect were said to believe that through non-stop movement, they could connect with divine power and release their sins. Their devotion centered around Saint Vitus, the same saint people later blamed for cursing the city. According to this version of events, the trances were never meant to be public. The guild halls provided privacy, where the faithful could leap, spin, and cry out without being judged. But when the behaviour spilt into the streets, it looked like chaos instead of worship. The dancers screamed, shook, and convulsed for hours, which many now recognise as signs of deep trance states. Historians who support this theory think the movement may have been a coping ritual. In a city crushed by hunger and disease, physical ecstasy could have been a way for common people to release fear and grief. The problem was that such behaviour clashed with the church's rules. The clergy and scholars of Strasbourg quickly labelled these trances as heresy or madness. Sebastian Brandt, a writer from Strasbourg, spoke out against these ecstatic rituals, calling the dancers mad people who were insulting God. Back then, any form of worship that existed outside the church was risky. A group using dance as a way to reach spiritual release would have looked suspicious, even dangerous to both religious and city leaders. But what if the answer wasn't hidden in secret rooms at all? What if the reason people danced came from something far above them? In the early 1500s, people in Europe saw the sky as alive with meaning. Every flicker of a star and every turn of a planet was thought to influence life on Earth. Astrology wasn't seen as superstition, but as science. Taught in respected universities like Bologna and Krakow, even physicians used it to understand illness, believing the stars that guided rulers and farmers also shaped the rhythm of human life. So when hundreds of people in Strasbourg began dancing without rest, it felt only natural for scholars to look upward for answers. Astrologers across the Holy Roman Empire studied their charts and began to agree on one thing: the heavens that summer were in a strange formation. Mars, Saturn, and Venus had aligned in what was called a conjunction, a meeting of planets whose energies could influence the world of men. Mars represented fire, war, and aggression. Saturn was cold, heavy, and ruled over despair. Venus, meanwhile, governed love and the pleasures of the flesh. Together, they created what astrologers described as a dangerous tension, a pull between desire and punishment, passion and restraint. To them, this pattern explained why people moved as if possessed by two forces at once, pleasure and agony. In noble households, astrologers whispered that the dance of the planets might cause madness or collective passion among the poor. Some even called it the dance of the spheres, believing that human beings were unconsciously mirroring the cosmic rhythm above them. According to these thinkers, The heavens had entered a dissonant harmony, and the citizens of Strasbourg were the instruments playing it out on earth. Astrology was deeply woven into daily life. It guided when to plant crops, when to marry, and when to travel. Physicians checked planetary positions before performing surgeries. If the stars could decide a good day to bleed a patient, they could just as easily decide when a city would fall into hysteria. The theory of planetary conjunctions was especially powerful. Every 20 years, Saturn and Jupiter met in the sky, and many believed that their meetings marked the start of great changes, plagues, wars, or revolutions. Renaissance scholars like Girolamo Cardano later argued that these great conjunctions followed long cycles that shaped all of human history. He claimed that when the two slowest planets aligned, new ages began. The birth of Christ, the rise of Charlemagne, and the start of the Reformation were all said to line up with these cosmic meetings. To thinkers like him, the Strasbourg dancing plague was just another moment when human fate followed the pulse of the heavens. At the same time, fear was spreading across Europe about what the planets might do next. Astrologers warned that another great conjunction in 1524, this time in the watery sign of Pisces, would bring a catastrophic flood. Across the continent, people built boats, stored food, and waited for the deluge that never came. Even though the flood did not happen, the panic showed how much power the stars still held over the human mind. So when the dancers of Strasbourg filled the streets, some said it was not God or poison that had driven them to move, but the sky itself. The alignment of Mars, Saturn, and Venus had set the human body in motion like a string plucked by unseen hands. But if Strasbourg's dancers were moved by the heavens, what about the ones who danced long before those planets ever aligned? It turns out Strasbourg wasn't the first place where crowds suddenly began to dance without rest. Almost a century before, something eerily similar had shaken the city of Aachen, in what is now Western Germany. In the summer of 1374, witnesses described hundreds of people pouring into the streets, joining hands and spinning in circles while shouting and crying. Some laughed, others screamed as if in pain. They danced for hours, sometimes days, without stopping. When they finally collapsed, they would twitch on the ground as if their bodies still refused to be still. Chroniclers from the time said priests tried sprinkling them with holy water and leading prayer processions, thinking the people were possessed or cursed by a saint. But that didn't stop it. Within weeks, the same strange behaviour spread to nearby towns like Cologne, Metz, and even Strasbourg itself. It was as if an invisible rhythm was moving through Europe, passing from one city to the next, leaving everyone terrified and confused. Then further south in Italy, another kind of dance mania appeared centuries later. It became known as tarantism. People believed it began when someone was bitten by a tarantula, and the only cure was to dance until the venom left their body. Musicians were called to play fast songs known as tarantellas, and victims would spin, jump, and sway until they collapsed from exhaustion. When you look at these two events side by side, it feels like the same mystery repeating itself under different names. Whether in medieval Germany or rural Italy, groups of people seem to lose control together, their bodies responding to pain, fear, or faith through movement. It makes you wonder if dancing was never the disease at all, but the only language they had to survive it. But behind all the legends and theories, there's one explanation that feels painfully real. Modern researchers now see the dancing plague of 1518 not as an act of madness, but as the breaking point of a city pushed too far. Strasbourg was already on the edge when it began. The summer heat was suffocating, food was running out, and disease had been spreading for months. Crop failures had hit the region again and again, leaving families hungry and weak. People were barely surviving, and when bodies are starved, the mind begins to suffer too. Many historians describe those weeks before the outbreak as a time of quiet panic. People were afraid, and no one knew where relief would come from. Religion added another layer of fear. In the early 1500s, most people believed every disaster was a punishment from God. Priests warned that sin had infected the city. They preached that famine and sickness were signs of divine anger. So when Frau Trophäa began to dance in the street one July morning and couldn't stop, people didn't see it as an illness. They saw it as a message from heaven. Her body, twisting and moving without rest, became a living warning. When more people joined her, the city saw it as proof that God's wrath was spreading. Historians like John Waller, known for his deep research into unusual historical phenomena, such as mass hysteria and social crises in early modern Europe, believe what happened next was a collective mental and physical collapse. In his book, A Time to Dance, A Time to Die, Waller explores the 1518 dancing plague in Strasbourg, using historical records alongside modern psychology and medicine to explain how social and emotional stress can lead to real physical symptoms. When people live through long periods of fear and hardship, their bodies can express emotional pain through movement. Neurologists call this a psychosomatic response, where stress causes spasms, tremors, or unconscious movements. This reaction is genuine but arises from the mind rather than a disease. In a closely connected community like Strasbourg, where fear and suffering were widespread, this kind of response could easily spread from person to person. Psychologists compare it to what they call mass psychogenic illness, when emotions spread through a group so strongly that everyone starts feeling the same thing. It happens faster in small, tight communities where people see and mirror each other's reactions. In Strasbourg, hunger, heat and belief made the perfect storm. When people saw others dancing uncontrollably, their own minds gave in to the same pattern. It was a chain reaction of stress, faith and exhaustion. Also, it is said that this shared movement gave people a strange kind of release. They had no power over their hunger or their lives, but in dancing, they could let everything go. The city council's response only made things worse. They brought in musicians to help the dancers purge the sickness through motion, filling the air with constant rhythm. That rhythm made it harder for the crowd to stop. Remember that people at the time believed the dancing plague was written in the stars? Astrologers claimed that a rare alignment of planets had thrown nature out of balance. Mars, Saturn, and Venus had come together in a way that supposedly stirred up heat and sickness in the human body. To believers, this was a cosmic dance mirrored by the chaos below. But later, astronomers and historians started to look closer. They found that this alignment wasn't rare at all. Similar patterns happen many times each century. It wasn't a one-time cosmic warning. It was just how the sky naturally moved. When scientists like Johannes Kepler and Tycho Brahe studied planetary motion in the years that followed, they discovered that these so-called dangerous conjunctions were nothing more than predictable cycles. What people in Strasbourg saw as divine signs were really ordinary events in the sky. Historians also point out that astrology during the Middle Ages often became a way to explain fear. When people didn't understand disease or famine, the heavens offered simple answers. You couldn't see germs or bacteria in 1518, but you could look up and watch planets moving. It made chaos feel organised. So even though the idea of a cosmic dance sounds poetic, it was more about comfort than fact. Researchers like H.C. Eric Middelfor have said that people used astrology as a kind of language to talk about suffering. They saw patterns where none existed, and those patterns helped them make sense of events that felt too big to face. It wasn't just superstition, it was survival thinking. When everything on Earth fell apart, it was easier to believe that the cause was written in the stars. Modern astronomers now confirm there was no unusual cosmic activity in 1518. The conjunctions that year were normal, with no physical link to the heat wave, famine, or disease in Strasbourg. When the stars don't hold all the answers, it makes sense to look closer at how people and power shape the strange events. The psychological warfare experiment. Some modern researchers think the Strasbourg Council didn't just fail to stop the dancing plague, they believe the city leaders may have helped create it. According to this theory, the outbreak was not only a medical or spiritual crisis, but also one of suggestion, sound, and spectacle. What began as panic might have turned into a kind of social experiment, an event shaped and fueled by the very people trying to contain it. When Frau Trophäa started dancing in July 1518, the council quickly called in the city's physicians. These doctors dismissed talk of curses or possession. They said it was a natural illness, something caused by overheated blood. Their advice sounded strange even for the time. They claimed that the best cure was not rest but movement. The dancers, they said, should keep going until the excess heat left their bodies. The council accepted this recommendation and put it into action, turning private suffering into a public event. Workers then set up stages and hired musicians so dancers could keep moving. Strong men helped those who collapsed. The city became a public show. Crowds gathered daily, some joining in. With hunger and fear in the air, The non-stop music and official support made the situation worse. The human mind is sensitive to what it sees and hears, especially when it comes from trusted voices. Psychologists today call this social contagion, the idea that emotion and behaviour can spread from one person to another through shared experience. Now, in a sense, the council had permitted the madness to continue. The presence of musicians and doctors gave the event legitimacy, making it seem like healing instead of harm. Those watching began to feel their own bodies respond. If they felt dizzy, feverish or anxious, it was easy to believe they were infected too. The rhythm, the repetition, and the authority of the spectacle worked together like suggestion. When the death toll began to rise, the same leaders who had ordered the music panicked. They banned dancing entirely and forbade the use of drums and tambourines, believing the loud beats had stirred the frenzy. They even dismantled the platforms that had once held the dancers. But by then, the damage was done. Some modern historians interpret the whole affair as one of the earliest examples of how authority and mass emotion can interact to create a shared illusion. The council's experiment in curing by motion may have accidentally proven how easily a crowd's fear can be shaped by sound, repetition, and belief. According to these researchers, the dancing plague wasn't only a mystery of illness, it was also a mirror of human psychology, showing what happens when suggestion is given power by those in charge. In the end, even after looking at all the possible logical explanations, the true cause of the dancing plague is still unclear. It makes you think about how the mind and body react in tough times, and how people come together when faced with fear. Was it a city pushed to its limits, a strange mix of belief and fear, or something we still can't quite explain? The truth might be closer than we think, or it might be one of history's lasting mysteries. What do you think happened?